Här i de långa korridorerna i Europaparlamentet pågår en tyst påverkansprocess för att öka maktöverföringen till EU. Det är centralisterna i parlamentet som under den gångna mandatperioden drivit en kampanj om en än hårdare styrning från Bryssel och lagt fram förslag om att ändra EU-fördragen, de lagar som idag styr det politiska samarbetet mellan medlemsstaterna. Allt för att möjliggöra ett större maktövertagande. EU är alltså på väg att bli den europeiska superstat som ledande svenska politiker över EU-valet 1994 försäkrade oss om aldrig skulle bli verklighet. Riks har besökt EU-parlamentet för att följa en del av processen kring förslaget om det nya EU-fördrag som nu önskas av vänsterliberalerna. Men hur ser egentligen de befintliga fördragen ut idag och vad är deras syfte? Så här låter det om man frågar en EU-parlamentariker.
Well, the EU treaties lay down basically the rules and regulations that we have within the EU on how to work together as sovereign nation states within the European Union. So how do we decide on trade, for example? International trade has become a competence of the European Union, so to negotiate trade deals. How do we work with common foreign policy? That's very much left to the sovereignty of the nation states themselves. So it's basically the rules laid down for the European Union on how it functions.
We have to understand that every member state in the EU has to follow treaties. So it means that if there is a conflict between the national constitution or the national law and there is a conflict with EU treaties, we always have to adopt EU law. There is no chance then to follow our national law. The same thing with the court system. Like if your Supreme Court in the member states goes against with a European court, we have to accept the decision of the European court. So that's why we couldn't really say about the real independence and sovereignty, because legally there is no sovereignty. Because finally, at the end of the day, the treaties are everything. So it means that how much we give the power with the treaties to the EU, it means that we have to give it away from the national states, from our member states. So that's why every change of the treaties are very tricky and very risky, because we have to be very careful what we're going to change, how we're going to change, and what we will change like in the EU system, and how much power will be in the European Commission or in the European Parliament.
Europeiska unionens generella uppgift är alltså att fatta beslut och lagstifta inom ramen av fördragen. Och för att genomföra den uppgiften finns 3 vägledande principer för EU att förhålla sig till. Den första principen handlar om tilldelade befogenheter, att EU endast har den makt som medlemsstaterna givit till överstatlig nivå. Den andra innefattar subsidiaritetsprincipen, att beslut ska fattas på lägsta möjliga nivå. Medan den tredje rör proportionalitetsprincipen, att beslut ska vara lämpliga och nödvändiga för att uppnå det önskade resultatet och inte innebära en orimlig börda.
The very principle that on which EU is based, that it is member states who found it. It is member states who delegate competences to the EU, but they remain sovereign to delegate them. But they are the sovereigns, EU is not. EU is executing some part of delegated sovereignty from member states.
Att EU-fördragen efterföljs i enlighet med dessa principer är bland annat ett sätt att säkra att även små stater som Sverige har inflytande i en union där fler och fler frågor avgörs med majoritetsbeslut. I denna dokumentär ska vi titta närmare på hur förslagen till fördragsändring som nu ligger på bordet ser ut och hur tongångarna i parlamentet går i den här frågan.
Well, what we've seen since the European Union was established some decades ago, that it's the philosophy behind the European Union has been this ever closer union. So in every treaty change, since the very start, we have seen more close cooperation at the European Union, more power transferred from its member states to the European Union. So this treaty change basically is another stepping stone in building a more federalized United States of Europe.
Broadly speaking, we can divide European integration into 2 phases. There's the period up to about 1993, and then there's the period since. The European Union wasn't called European Union up to 1993, it was called the European Community. Its powers were more limited, and it was more intergovernmental in character, i.e. you had to have intergovernmental agreement before you could move forward. Since then, the European Union has been moving towards supranationality. Up to about 1993, the European community went hand in hand with a period of relative prosperity in Europe. You could say that it was economically a success. But Europe has been losing competitiveness ever since they got it into their mind that this halfway house between an international organization and a state had to be transformed into a full-blown state.
The philosophy behind many of the people who are triggering this initiative is the philosophy of ever closer union, which means in the end working towards this European federalized institution, so to say.
The idea is always, the pro-EU advocates is always you have to harmonize because you have to, harmonization means you standardize things at the highest level. Well, what they seem to forget is that very often you can standardize, but it's a dumbing down process. So things are harmonized at a very low level. That's in fact what has been happening.
Men vi kan ju ta det här från början och se närmare på vilka det är som vill ändra den befintliga förordningen och varför.
Well, as we know it from the history and also today, like the main idea always for the treaty changes comes from the left.
Here in the European Parliament, the majority is in favor, but this is a centre-left. It is mainly starting from communists, Greens, liberals, socialists, and People's Party. They are People's Party with some exceptions, which are in favor. The centre-right and right part, minority, is against.
Det är ju de stora partigrupperna som bildar en närmast nordkoreansk majoritet här inne i huset som har drivit igenom det. Drömmen bland EU-centralisterna är att överföra makten från medlemsstaterna hit till Strasbourg och till Bryssel, att avlöva de nationella parlamenten makten, göra om dem till regioner så att den verkliga makten faktiskt finns här.
Since the Lisbon Treaty, which was signed at the beginning of this century, we have seen that many European Union federalists, enthusiasts, think that the European Union still not functions properly because they believe it should function as a state. So that's what triggers this treaty change, that they want to really say that we are now on these crossroads to really take the direction to form a fully federalized European state. That's basically the trigger that they want this treaty change for.
Well, it's not peculiar to the Parliament. The European Commission has been hatching plans like this for a very long time. But you're right, the European Parliament is full of integrationists. They are not content with the already very considerable powers enjoyed by the European Union. They want to transfer basically all policies to the European Union. So they want to transform the European Union from a very powerful international organization into a superstate. I don't think that's an exaggeration.
I think the main author for the federal Europe is Guy Verhofstadt. He has been fighting here with Nigel Farage, with all the other conservatives, because he has dreamed about the super European state where everything is controlled by the EU. And of course he has his own puppets here, like from the Greens, the small young guys are following him as a master and just screaming, yeah, we need more EU. But if you ask about something like, okay, can you really decide everything? And you know better, what's better, like for Sweden or Finland or Estonia or Spain or Italy? Of course they will say that, yes, we have the competence here in the European Parliament, but I'm afraid that they doesn't even have like the main competence about climate changes or the economy or inflation. But they are the main authors of this idea to change the treaties and to federalize more and more this power to the EU.
Federal is a slightly ambiguous term. In some member states it means you actually devolve powers. That's not what they want to do here. Here they want to centralize power at the EU level in Brussels and in Strasbourg.
En av dem som varit mest drivande i att ta fram det här förslaget är belgiska EU-federalisten Guy Verhofstadt, Belgiens för detta premiärminister, som bland annat är en förespråkare för att upphäva Europas nationalstater helt.
If you read his books, he is very clear and very outspoken on what he believes that the European Union should be. And he believes that we are going back, it's actually the title of his book, a new age of empires. So he believes that we are now working towards a world with major superpowers, and he believes the European Union should be one of them as a federal superstate. It's actually laid down in his book.
Over the last 3 years, Mr. Verhofstadt had been presiding over an event called the Conference on the Future of Europe. The Conference on the Future of Europe was a kind of pseudo-democratic process where they handpicked 800 European citizens to make recommendations for further changes to the European Union. I say handpicked, and handpicked they were, because all of these citizens were pro-EU. They were then advised, they gathered here in Strasbourg every fortnight. They arrived, they were then advised by so-called Spinelli experts. These are EU officials and professors and academics who have been dreaming about more European unity for decades. They then advised these citizens, and in the end they came up with a list of 925 recommendations, all of which recommend the transfer of more powers to the European Union, not a single one of which envisages the transfer back of powers to the member state. So they've been working on this for a long time.
One author of this initiative is the former agent of the Secret Service in the Eastern Germany, who has studied in the university in Moscow. He's now almost 70 years old, German former communist. The second author is from the Greens. Of course, the main author is Guy Verhofstadt from Renew. So we can see, like, by the ideology clearly where they come from and what they want to do. But I think it's not surprising really that they have been always communists. It doesn't matter are they calling themselves as a Greens or liberals or the left or whoever, they all are communists.
Förhandlingarna från hans håll har framförallt handlat om att kunna avskaffa nationella veton och på så sätt få till en maktcentralisering. Och i planerna som hittills presenteras i förslaget ingår bland annat ökad makt till EU, att lagstifta om skatteupptagning och militärt försvar, att unionen ska få centrala befogenheter i frågor om skogsindustri och folkhälsa, samt att det ska krävas endast 2/3 majoritet för att fatta beslut i rådet. Men behövs det här verkligen? Och hur skulle det påverka oss i Sverige?
Jag har varken hört eller sett stora folkmassor runt om i Europa som har ropat efter Europas förenta stater. Tvärtom, så tittar vi på Sverige så är ju en massiv majoritet emot fler överföringar av makt till EU. Exempelvis skulle ju Sverige inte vara garanterad en plats i EU-kommissionen, vilket är den instans som lägger alla lagförslag i EU. Sverige skulle få mindre inflytande över sin egen utbildningspolitik, hälsopolitik, skattepolitik. Skulle förlora sitt veto gällande EUs budget. Så det betyder i praktiken att Sverige får lika mycket makt som ett bondesland i Tyskland.
Och vad är din kommentar till att en ändå överhängande majoritet röstat för de här maktöverföringarna till Bryssel?
Det finns en EU-centralistisk dröm sedan länge som går ut på att EU ska ha kontroll över plånboken, EU ska ha kontroll över försvaret, inte minst genom att upprätta en egen militär förmåga. Idag röstade ju majoritet för att upprätta ett militärt försvar inom EUs ram. Man vill ha en superstat helt enkelt. Vi som är kritiska menar ju att man gör som i historien om Dr. Frankenstein som ville skapa den perfekta varelsen men som istället skapade ett monster. Majoriteten här inne håller på att skapa ett centralistiskt monster. Historiskt har ju medlemsstaterna alltid haft sista ordet, men inflytandet för Europaparlamentet har stärkts genom åren och det är ju då en stor majoritet centralister här nere. Nu vill de roffa åt sig mer makt, de vill utse Europakommissionens ordförande, de vill kunna lägga egna lagförslag, och problemet är att många partier, inte Sverigedemokraterna tror jag, men många andra skickar sina mest hängivna EU-entusiaster ner till Bryssel istället för representanter som har en nykter syn på det europeiska samarbetet, som vill se ett huvudsakligen mellanstatligt samarbete. Och det gör ju att Europaparlamentet hela tiden driver på för att flytta makten till Bryssel.
Och enligt Guy Verhofstadt är det här den huvudsakliga anledningen till att en ändring behövs.
Because the European Union in a number of fields cannot function. So, for example, take sanctions, the 12th package, impossible because there is a veto of Hungary. The entrance of Romania in Schengen, not possible because there is a veto of whom? Of Austria. So, actually there is a huge problem in the Union, in the governance of the Union, that unanimity makes it impossible to act fast and effectively. And that's the main big reform that we want to make, that everything will be decided with qualified majority and not with unanimity anymore.
And what is the next step in the process now?
The next step is that all these proposals are sent to the Council, to the European Council, and the European Council needs to take a decision by simple majority, so it's not so difficult, by simple majority to call for what we have asked for, a convention. And this convention could then start after the next European elections, because it is necessary certainly to have a convention based on also the results of the European elections.
Men på den punkten går meningarna isär.
Mr. Verhofstadt, the author, one of the 4 or 5 authors of this report, quite openly talks about the European empire. We need an empire. Well, I'm afraid I disagree with that. Most empires have failed, so will this one.
Well, they put it under the guise of creating a more effective, more coherent and more decisive European Union. That's what they say now. Take some events that happened not that long ago. So they are now saying, well, all of a sudden we are in a trade war with China, so we need more cooperation as a European Union. We need more decisive action. They say we are at war with Putin, so we don't need the vetoes in order to sanction them. So basically they want to get rid of the decision-making process in order to push their own agenda. And that's what some members of European Parliament thought would be a good idea, to trigger what is called a European Convention, which will initially start the negotiations for treaty change.
There are very many members in the EU Parliament who really thinks that they are representing directly the people because they are elected. The only thing what they forget is that very probably the people who voted for them here were participating in the less amount of the people than in the national elections. So they are not really on the same level with national MPs. But they would like to believe that they are really representing all the European people here, like the 705 MEPs are representing 440 million people all over Europe. But that gives like the power to them to believe that, oh yeah, we can do whatever we want. I don't really believe that the majority of the people in the member states support that, the change of the treaties and to give more power and decision-making process to Brussels.
En annan som kritiserat detta hårt är Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, polsk ledamot som sitter i ECR, den konservativa grupp där även Sverigedemokraterna ingår. Han menar att Verhofstadts fördrag bryter mot upprätthållandet av EUs principer och att det skulle omkullkasta balansen mellan medlemsländerna och EU.
Now it would be the EU who would be, or the new EU, the superstate, would be sovereign to decide what competences are left, if any, and which, at the level of member states. So it is a complete overhaul, upside down the union, no longer union, superstate. The essence of the change is that more competences would be shifted to the EU level, far away from the citizens, liquidating the competences of the member states and reducing the role to the regions, abolishing the right of veto, which is the last bastion of sovereignty for small and medium-sized member states, and also introducing, for example, euro as obligatory for members of the Union. Solutions would be anti-federal, not at all federalist, as they say, hiding behind this positive connotation bringing term, because in federation members are equal. Here members are weight as much as population they have, which means big are a lot to say and small and medium not. So it is a kind of a discriminatory scheme and not at all democratic, and as I said, not at all federal. Big boys, continental powers like Germany and France, with some others co-opted, want to run the show, and others will be subordinated, will have to follow, and the voice of their citizens will be neglected, and the new treaty would allow it. Well, member states would be much weaker. Member states would be deprived of many competences. I mean, 9 cardinal competences to be shifted to EU level: foreign policy, security policy, defense policy, border policy, industry, education, health, trans-border infrastructure. All that would be passed to the EU. So these competences would no longer belong to the member states. What would be left? Very few. So member states formally might be still called states, but they would be in fact regions, Länder, like in Germany, or regions or provinces like in France, or any other form of regionalism or provinces that are now within the member states. So that will be reduced to that level of competence. So citizens in those member states, still states by name, would be voting to elect governments who would have very little to say. And on the EU level, there would be those who would be taking decisions, but citizens would have no influence upon them.
And is there a need for these changes, or why does the EU Parliament think citizens want them?
There's no need. They say it is needed to enlarge to Ukraine, which is complete fake. The scientific research and empirical data show that after all the previous enlargement, being old or the recent Big Bang, 2004, the decision-making process in the Union accelerated and was facilitated after enlargement, and not the contrary. So it is a huge mystification and lie. And the scientific arguments are that when enlarging, EU should decentralize, not centralize. But they want to centralize because this is elites who want to grab the power away from citizens, away from democratic decision-making on the level where democracy works, which is nation-state, and transfer it to the level where democracy suffers a huge democratic deficit, which is the European level, because there's no demos. So it's an elitist project in the interest of the mainstream, big countries and big political groupings of the center-left, center-right.
EU bygger alltså på en strävan att konstant vilja fördjupa det politiska samarbetet. Målet är en ständigt mer sammanflätad politisk union, och i kombination med det återkommande och nya kriser som uppstår finns det ständiga och ökande krav på att unionen ska få fler befogenheter. Allt på bekostnad av medlemsstaternas möjlighet att påverka och styra de beslut som tas. Och det är det här som det senaste förslaget om fördragsändringar gäller.
Well, if one side gets more power, it means that it has to come from somewhere. And if I asked yesterday in a debate from one leftist that, okay, if we're going to give more power to the European Parliament, so it probably has to come from national parliaments. But now is the question, are we really better to making decisions here with 705 members than national parliaments who are elected by the people directly in the member state? And of course the leftists said, yes, of course, well, we know it much better, like, because we have the competence here. So it shows this kind of Napoleon mentality that we are the kings of the world and we know everything. So of course it will change the balance of the power. And in a bad way. So it means the smaller group of the people will get more power all over the member states. But as I hope, it will not happen, hopefully.
It's a threat to democracy, it's a threat to the member states as they are. It is an attempt to deprive citizens of their states to which they are attached by history, millennial history of most EU member states, and heritage and cultural identity and so forth. That would be contrary to the motto of the present treaties which we defend and the present union which we defend. That would be something very different because no longer as motto the treaty says united in diversity. It would be united in uniformity.
Denna maktöverföring är dock inget som skett över en natt, utan är något som pågått successivt över en lång tid och i det dolda. Allt för att media inte ska uppmärksamma det hela. Ett exempel på något som används som ett verktyg för att dölja det ökande maktövertagandet av Bryssel är bland annat den så kallade klimatkrisen. Likaså nyttjades även pandemin och de negativa ekonomiska konsekvenserna av nedstängningarna som ursäkt för att genomföra en stor gemensam belåning. Pengar som sen kommer att delas ut som bidrag. EU-budgeten och den svenska EU-avgiften, svenska folkets skatter, agerade säkring. Detta trots att fördragen inte godkänner sådana skuldoperationer. En skuldsättning som samtidigt ökar trycket på medlemsstaterna att godkänna fler förslag på EU-skatter.
All the hypocrites who are sitting in the nice bubble and they're believing that they are the best ones, the smartest ones, and they know exactly what we have to do. And that's the problem with the European Parliament, because those people who have been here for years, some of them have been like for 20 years, they really feel that they are in the higher level than the national states or the national members of the Parliament. So it means that they have the right to say how we should now change the treaties. So it's some kind of complex, like the psychological complex where they feel that we have to go forward with the project because, we started with the economical union on the 50s. Now we are a process here where we have also European Parliament and Commission and the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. But we have to go forward because there is a very big dreamland where we're going to have the nice empire. But of course they will not say loudly out that we would like to have empire where the member states have no real power. They are just part of the empire, like in the Roman Empire.
Och hur ser läget ut idag då? Och finns det något vi EU-medborgare kan göra för att påverka processen? För vi lever väl ändå i en demokrati, än så länge.
First of all, we have to make our citizens all over the Union in member states aware what kind of operation is taking place, because this elitist plot, it is a plot, is meant to be done in silence, without society knowing what is happening, without media talking about it, just a silent grab of power. So we have to teach and to inform. Society has to wake up and to organize a protest, to organize themselves, to say no, and then to elect political parties who will say no, who will prevent this from happening.
Som sagt, det förs ingen debatt om var makten ska ligga i medlemsstaterna inklusive Sverige, och utan debatt så får inte medborgarna möjlighet att yttra sin mening, och då går demokratin förlorad. Men det beror ju naturligtvis på att EU inte har ett eget demos, ett eget folk, utan vi består ju av en massa olika folk, och det svenska folkets högsta legitima beslutande organ är Sveriges riksdag och inget annat.
The fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is the EU and what should it be? According to us, according to the European Conservatives and Reformists group, we believe that the European Union is of added value as a common market, as a voluntary international organization where member states work together, where it brings added value, but definitely most of the aspects of foreign policy, of sovereign choices, should be left with the member states. So that's what the European Union we stand for. On the other hand, we have the federalists who are now asking for this treaty change. They believe in a world of global governance where the European Union really has this seat at the world stage, at the UN, at NATO, as a European Union, as a European federal superstate. That is what we believe the European Union should not be headed. We believe the European Union should remain strong as a common market, but first and foremost an international, intergovernmental organization.
Taktiken från EU-centralisternas sida är alltid att driva på så mycket de bara kan fram tills att någon säger stopp. Och det är dags att folket börjar sätta stopp för de här planerna, och det kan vi inte minst göra genom att avkräva den svenska regeringen och göra motstånd mot fördragsändringar. Det kan vi göra den 9 juni nästa år då det är EU-val. Det är dags att höja sin röst, dags att få till stånd en riktig debatt om EUs framtid.
Det ligger alltså i händerna på er medborgare att fatta det här beslutet. Vill ni ha mer eller mindre makt till Bryssel? Ni avgör.